Year, which begins July the 1st. Gary Baumgarten, Fox News.
In the NBA playoffs, Boston beat Atlanta again to go up 2-0 in their series. Cleveland topped New York. Phoenix beat the LA Clippers. Those series now tied 1-1. I'm Dave Anthony, and this is Fox News.
It's time for WPTV's First Alert Weather from the WPTV News Channel 5 newsroom. Now with 7 meteorologists covering the Treasure and Gold Coasts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now here's WPTV's First Alert meteorologist.
With partly to mostly cloudy skies and highs in the lower 80s. Also, it will be breezy today. Winds out of the northeast, 15 to 20 miles per hour. As we head into tonight, dry conditions expected with a few clouds overnight. Temperatures in the mid-60s for overnight lows. Now tomorrow, there's a slight chance for some passing showers. Otherwise, it'll be partly sunny and breezy for your Thursday. I'm WPTV First Alert meteorologist Jennifer Correa for WSTU 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.
You are listening to WSTU, Stewart, Jensen Beach, Hope Sound, Martin County's Heritage Station.
It's time now for the Casey Ingram Show on WSTU. The opinions expressed are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WSTU. WSTU does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WSTU. It's time to call in with your questions and comments at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. And now, here's Casey Ingram.
Well, good morning and welcome back. I have a couple great shows on tap here today, and I hope you're all fueled up and nobody's having problems getting fuel. I know there's so many stations that have run out because of the flooding down there by Fort Lauderdale, so it's been an interesting week and really a rainy week, so I'm really glad in the studio I have with me Greg Braun. He's the executive director with Guardians of Martin County, and we're going to be talking a lot about water quality issues, which we've seen a lot of water here this last week, so glad to have you back here in the studio, Greg.
No, thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Before I get into that, I want to thank Commercial Mortgage, who's been in the industry of small balance corporate finance since 2003. Their focus is on equity, new debt solutions, challenging corporate foreclosures, and debt restructures. Commercial Mortgage never charges a front fee or deposit, and consultations are always free. Areas of expertise include hotels, marinas, office buildings, restaurants, apartments, multifamily, condos, golf courses, home builders, land development, including new and repurposed developments. Call Commercial Mortgage, LLC at 561-310-5295. That's 310-5295. Or visit them online, commercialmortgagellc.com. Also, don't forget about that best kept secret in Martin County. You can come by boat, car, or stroll the boardwalk. It's the best kept secret, and what does it have to offer? Local artist, an Airbnb, art gallery, boat charters, marina, craft and creamery. In fact, there's craft beers, wine, and ice cream. There's literally something for the entire family. You can rent paddle boards as well. All this is found at the Fish House Art Center. It's down in the pocket, down in Port Salerno. You can look them up online before you head out, thefishhouseartcenter.com, or give them a call, 221-5482, if you have any questions. And finally, don't forget about Indiantown Marina. It is one of South Florida's best boat storage facilities, located inland on the Okeechobee Waterway. Very well protected. Hurricane Hole, we're coming up to season here just a few weeks away, so we're going to have to start thinking about that. But in the meantime, if you need any work done on your boat, they are a do-it-yourself and full-service boat yard, so they can do electrical, mechanical, bottom painting, whatever your boat needs. Give the good folks at Indiantown Marina a call, 772-631-3272. Again, that's 631-3272. Now, with me in the studio is Greg Braun. He's a professional ecologist with over 20 years of experience in environmental projects in Florida, the Bahamas, and the Caribbean. Greg specializes in avian and coastal ecology and habitat restoration projects. A certified environmental professional, Greg's Jupiter, Florida-based company provides ecological consulting services to governmental agencies, non-governmental conservation organizations, and private property owners. He serves on the steering committee of the Southeast Florida Scrub Ecosystem Working Group and the board of directors of the Martin County chapter of National Florida Native Plant Society. Greg was awarded the William Hornaday Award Award for Distinguished Service in Conservation in 2007 and Distinguished Services Award from the Martin County Conservation Alliance in 2001. A graduate of Florida Institute of Technology with a Bachelor of Science in Oceanography, Greg works with a variety of threatened and endangered animals and plants, including Florida scrub jays, manatees, gopher tortoises, Johnson seagrass, and a variety of beach and dune species. Greg is here this afternoon and this morning, actually, in his capacity as Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County. Guardians are a local nonprofit organization that advocates for growth management and balancing natural resource protection with economic growth and living responsibly. Greg, it's good to have you in the studio. You have such a tremendous background, and I've had you in here before. I used to sit on the board when you were with the Guardians, or when I was with the Guardians. You're still there. And there's just been a lot of good work done over the year, and particularly with water quality. So let's kind of start out here with the last project that you were in the studio talking about, and that was the Loxa-Lucie Headwater Project. And folks, you can look that up online, loxa-lucieheadwaters.org. Tell us a little bit about that, Greg, and where that is today.
Sure, I'd be glad to. That particular project is down in the Hope Sound area, and it is an ecological restoration project that is sponsored by sort of three different nonprofit organizations: the Guardians of Martin County, the Conservation Fund, and the Treasured Lands Foundation. We sort of banded together a couple years ago when we recognized that although the governmental entities are doing everything in their powers to improve water quality, that there's more that needs to be done. So the Guardians identified this project that will benefit both the Loxa-Lucie River and the South Fork of the St. Lucie. So that's how we came up with the name Loxa-Lucie.
Okay.
So it's Loxa-Lucie Headwaters. And many of the listeners may not be aware or knowledgeable about what headwaters are. But it's essentially those low-lying areas. They're not necessarily wetlands and not necessarily all uplands, but it's the areas that during the rainy season, if you walk through them, they get kind of squishy. But during the dry season, you can walk through, no problems at all.
Okay.
So those areas are not generally protected under our current regulations. But in our area, where we're having water quality problems, both in the South Fork of the St. Lucie and in the Loxa-Lucie River, we recognized that there was more that needed to be done than what the governmental entities were doing. So our consortium is trying to acquire or preserve, one way or another, vacant lands that are currently up for sale and put them into permanent conservation. And these are in the areas that will flow into or towards the South Fork of the St. Lucie. And Bridge Road is sort of the key landmark feature in the area because water, depending on where the rain is falling, sometimes it flows north under the culverts under Bridge Road, sometimes it flows south. But either way, both of those water bodies are having water quality problems. So the idea is to purchase these lands that are currently vacant and do some sort of ecological restoration so that when the water flows off of those lands and goes into those rivers, it's clean enough for people to be recreating.
And how wonderful is that? And actually, as you drive down Bridge Road, you can see the signs now. You've already purchased some property there, and that's what we talked about last time you were in the studio. It's a fairly wide swath. I want to say, 60 or 100 feet wide, about?
The parcel that we purchased is approximately 2 miles in length, and yes, it's 660 feet deep on the north side of Bridge Road.
Quite a bit.
And so we did close on that one with donations solely from the community, which is amazing that the community recognized the value of this project overall. And so we did raise several $1 million for this acquisition, and that was successful enough. We saw that the community was so supportive of it. We have continued the process. We now have a contract for our second purchase, and so we're accepting donations for that as well.
Congratulations. Is that also on Bridge Road?
It is on Bridge Road. It's on the south side of the road, though.
Fantastic.
The one that we've got right now is on the north side. We have applied for some grant monies to do some ecological restoration on that. But then this parcel on the south side came up for sale, and it's strategically located next to a 100-acre parcel that's already owned by Martin County. So
Oh, wow.
we thought it was a good one to add into conservation stewardship. It's a property that had formerly been agricultural lands. It had been drained for cattle pasture. And so now our plan, once we have completed the acquisition, is to plug up those ditches and do some hydrologic restoration, turn it back into the wetlands that it had historically been.
Again, we're speaking with Greg Braun. He's the executive director with the Guardians of Martin County, and he's truly an ecological and environmental expert. If you have any questions for Greg, the number is 220-9788. That's 772-220-WSTU. Greg, what's so neat about that too, folks, and if you realize as you're driving down Bridge Road, because you're purchasing the land that borders right up to Bridge, it's still developed behind that land. You know, we have some different properties. There's golf courses and whatnot that's going in, but you're really not going to see those from Bridge Road because of these parcels that you're able to purchase that fronts where people drive and where they see, and of course it's helping the environment as well. So it's a huge win for really the entire community. And you know, as you drive around Martin County, I think that's one of the things that makes us different here is all the green that we have, all the green space, and it's beautiful. We always talk about Walmart. You don't even see that from US 1 because there's so much space and buffer in front of it. So this is one of those areas.
It's a corridor that what we're trying to preserve is both an east-west corridor along Bridge Road, because indeed you're right. Excuse me. That's what one sees as you drive Bridge Road. But what you don't see, just on the other side of that green corridor, is that Jonathan Dickinson is less than a mile to the south, and the Atlantic Ridge Preserve State Park is only a mile or so to the north. So part of what we're trying to do is acquire the parcels in between those two to make a connection between those state park areas. The wildlife uses it as a corridor already. And what we're hoping to do once these properties get into conservation ownership is to be able to link them up so the animals will continue to go back and forth, but hikers and bikers and others can get from one state park to the other.
That's something I remember you studied as well, was the animals that were crossing actually Bridge Road. And, you know, there's so many of them that get killed from the cars there. It's really, you found some endangered. I think there was a panther, it might have been. It's really sad. Is this going to help with that at all? And Bridge Road is still going to be there. So
it will be, but the county they were unaware until our study of the level of wildlife mortality on the road. You know, it's a kind of a dangerous road even for people.
Oh, it is. It is. I don't like driving down it.
Yeah,
speeders are just terrible.
That's right. So what we're hoping to do is work with the county to indeed improve both driver safety and the safety for the animals. And it wasn't until we got into this Loxa-Lucie project that we became aware of the amount of roadkill on that road.
Right.
And so we started doing these surveys once we saw a few dead birds, and during the year and a bit that we did the surveys, there were hundreds of species of a whole variety of.
I remember there was a lot. I can't
classes.
remember each one, but there was a lot. It was surprising.
Right. Yeah, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians. And so we talked with the county, and you're right that they did come in and put the wildlife crossing signs up. And I think that helps. But we continued our study after that to show that while that helps, it has not solved the problem at all. As I drove Bridge Road to a meeting on Tuesday, I counted 5 fresh animal carcasses just on that stretch between I-95 and US 1.
Right.
So the challenge is that the water table there is pretty high. And so we've been studying it long enough to understand sort of the cyclical nature that goes back to our root issue here of water and water quality, water quantity, those kinds of things. That there are a number of culverts underneath Bridge Road, allows water to flow from one side to the other. And during the dry season, many of these animals are going through those culverts.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
once we get to the rainy season, water level goes up, the culverts are completely underwater, and so those animals that would otherwise go through the culvert are now going over the road,
Forced
and that
over.
makes them vulnerable to getting hit by cars. So at a variety of locations in South Florida where there have been high levels of wildlife mortality, the DOT or the local entity has been incorporating wildlife crossings into road renovations. And so that is what we think we hope that the county will do. It's a big ticket item, I'm afraid. So we've talked with them, and we're hoping to, in the future, be able to get a capital improvements project budget that would allow for a portion of that to be replaced with wildlife crossings, just the culvert areas. And what a wildlife crossing is, for those of you who may not be aware, is an area that is built up enough that not only will it allow the water to flow, but also there's some sort of a pathway for the land animals, so that raccoons or bobcats or foxes or whatever will be able to walk on an elevated pathway. So the challenge on Bridge Road is that the water level is generally so high, there's just not enough space. So the reason that the cost is so high to put in this wildlife crossing is you've got to build the road up several feet.
Okay.
So we have identified some possible grant opportunities at the federal level, and we're hoping to work with the county to incorporate that.
It almost seems like, too, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about some of the developments that are going in down there. It's too bad the county didn't ask that as part of their ask. If this is approved, we help, put in the wildlife crossings, because the property butts up through that area. So just throwing that out there. There's all kind of places to get money. It's just how you get it. So
That's right. Yeah.
And also, before we move on to some water quality, which I want to do, Greg, you had Jeff Corwin come in and speak. You were talking about the first leg of the Loxa-Lucie project, which is very exciting. Is he kind of getting more involved in the area? And I think he is with Florida in general.
Yes, he certainly is. We were unaware that he does come to the Stewart area frequently. And he heard about our project and has joined our steering committee.
Oh, fantastic.
And so we're very pleased that a wildlife advocate of his stature has taken an interest in our project. And it was very interesting at the presentation that he gave back in December was, we kind of take the environment here in the Treasure Coast area, sometimes we kind of take it for granted.
You're right.
And here he is doing these wildlife shows all over the world. And he says, you've got these resources right here, manatees and panthers and bears down in the Everglades and the flocks of roseate spoonbills and all these birds. He said, you really need to recognize how special this area is and do what you can to protect it. So we're very glad that he has joined our steering committee and will be helping us out with those kinds of things.
That's exciting news. And absolutely right. The Indian River Lagoon is the most diverse lagoon in North America, right? Or at least it was.
It was, yes. May not hold that stature anymore. So that's one of the areas that the Guardians are pleased to be engaged with a number of the water quality advocacy groups. So the Rivers Coalition, the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program.
Yes.
And they have gotten some funding from the federal government for restoration kinds of projects. In fact, for those who might be interested, the NEP, then they're based up in Sebastian for the entire Indian River Lagoon. They have just published a request for proposals or for grants for a small grants program. And it is indeed for nonprofit groups, governmental entities, that sort of thing, to apply for grants for some kind of projects that will benefit the lagoon.
That's perfect. Now, the folks that want to help out, and I know you do a lot of fundraising here in the community, but how do they reach out to you that say, yeah, we want to conserve land, and we're going to move on to the city of Stewart next. They're talking about a little parcel in Haney Park now that it's like a small parcel that's commercial. The rest of it's Haney Park, and so they're actually talking about what can they do with that parcel. Is it possible to put it back into conservation? So I know a lot of folks support that, and what can folks do to support you, the Guardians, to help raise funds for these lands?
Yes, well, we certainly are in the fundraising mode right now for our second Loxa-Lucie Headwaters acquisition, and there's information on our website about that, both on the Guardian's website, but also on Loxa-LucieHeadwaters.org. And there's information there about how people can make a tax-deductible donation. It actually goes to The Conservation Fund is the name of the nonprofit organization that is accepting the funds for that.
Okay.
And overall, our strategy for that is that many of those lands within the Loxa-Lucie corridor are on the state of Florida's desirable acquisition list for Florida forever.
Okay.
And if you have followed that, Florida Forever has not gotten the funding in recent years that it used to have. So it's a highly competitive program, and our Atlantic Ridge Ecosystem Project is fairly low on the priority list. It's been on the list for years. It has not moved forward. And so this is sort of what led to the whole Loxa-Lucie project, as we went to the Florida Forever folks up in Tallahassee and said, we've been on the list for years, no acquisitions have taken place. What's going on? How can we get up into the money? And they said, well, you need a couple of things. Number one is local support. Nobody has been here in years to advocate for this acquisition, so we don't know if there's local support or not. And then number two, certainly we all know that land values here in Martin County are very high. And so for the statewide Florida Forever project, we're competing with those properties up in the Panhandle that are going for generally less than 10% of what our land values are here along the east coast of Florida, east of I-95. There are not that many properties available.
There are not.
So to address those concerns and to get our project up into the state money, we have gone out and had given a number of presentations in the community. So we have gotten a number of endorsements from governmental entities, not only Martin County, but the City of Stuart, Village of Tequesta, Sewell's Point, just a variety of organizations. That has given our organization more credibility as we go out and ask for donations as well. The idea is that once we have acquired these properties, we're going to be going to the state and essentially offering those properties to them free of charge in order to make our projects more cost competitive when we're compared to other projects up in North Florida.
Okay. A lot of great things happening here. Greg, I met you about a decade ago when we had all the discharges from Lake Okeechobee, and with all this rain event that we've been having over this past week, I can't help but worry about what's going to happen again here this year if we keep getting the rain. Let's talk a little bit in this last decade. You just mentioned on your way into the studio that City of Stuart has come a long way with their water quality. What's going on with the City of Stuart, and what all have they been doing to help make sure the river is clean and hopefully, we can't stop the discharges in the city, but at least we can help.
Right. Yeah.
What we can do locally.
They certainly have. The City of Stuart has really stepped up on a variety of issues. And probably one example of that is the renovations that they made at Shepherd Park, just 2 blocks from where we are right now.
Yes.
If you haven't visited that park recently, go in and take a look. They have done a project very kind of conscientiously about trying to pre-treat rainwater before it flows off into the creek there by the boat docks. So that's just one example of a project that they're doing. Overall, we know that the water quality in the City of Stuart is so much affected by the discharges from Lake Okeechobee. And so it was very interesting, the recent Rivers Coalition meeting that was held out at the Locks that the Corps of Engineers was at, that I won't say that they got mixed signals, but I think they saw a representation of the diverse interests about water quality in the Stuart area. There were people who patted them on the back publicly for the great works that they are doing.
Yes.
And we can talk about how they are now considering health effects when they decide whether or not to discharge from the lake. But at the same time, there were other speakers who said, in spite of all that you're doing, we're still getting dumped on. The oysters cyclically are dying when we get too much fresh water, and other impacts to the lagoon. So I think it was fitting. Some people were criticized for being too aggressive to them, but they have to recognize that we have been suffering these kinds of consequences for decades.
Right.
Ed Keller from T.C. Palm read an account from Ernie Lyons from the Stuart News back decades ago that identified this as a problem. And similarly, there was a resolution from the county commission dated, I think, in the 1960s complaining about those kinds of problems.
When they had the first river funeral was back in the 1960s, you know? I mean, it has been going on forever. And Jackie Thurlipish, our South Florida Water Management District board member, her and her husband have done an amazing job documenting the destruction of the estuary, the destruction of the seagrasses, and the changes in the water. So we have people that are looking at these things, and it really seems to have been speeding up over time. I mean, over the last 10 years since I've known you, there was seagrass when I first moved here, and now it's gone. So, all these things are important for people to realize we are trying to fight, right? But there's a lot more work to be done.
And water storage in the system is certainly important, and that's what we're recognizing through all this.
Yes.
What we need to do is capture that rainwater and allow it to naturally percolate rather than just running off into the rivers where it's taking your
Which they
pollutants
just
with it.
broke ground on Senator Negron's. Give me a couple more seconds. Senator Negron's reservoir just broke ground here about, a month ago or so. So that was really big news, and so happy to hear that.
That's right. They've made a lot of progress with Everglades restoration projects. There's still a lot to be done,
Sure
but
is.
maybe we've seen the worst of it.
Absolutely. Well, Greg Braun, it's been a pleasure to have you in the studio. I had so much more I was going to ask you about, especially with water discharges, so we'll just have to have you back.
Glad to.
Hopefully
we can
it'll
talk
be a
about
non-issue.
growth management kinds of issues, but
yes, I would love to do that, actually.
This is Earth Day weekend, so this is a perfect time for us to have this discussion. And there were some Earth Day events last weekend in Hope Sound. This coming weekend, it's actually up in St. Lucie County at the Oxbow Eco Center on Saturday, an all-day function free of charge. There will be a lot of environmental exhibitors there.
Fantastic. Greg Braun, thank you so much. Guardians of Martin County, and also go to Loxa-Lucie Headwaters.org if you want to find out more about the projects, making sure we get conservation land here in Martin County. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.